As you've heard on Bridge City News, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's carbon tax break is primarily aimed at Atlantic Canada. Many in the Atlantic provinces heat their homes with oil, and they say they really can't afford to pay the carbon tax with that fuel source this winter. But what about the rest of us, particularly here in Western Canada, who heat our homes with natural gas? Alberta's spoken out against the carbon tax on our natural gas bills, and so has Saskatchewan. In fact, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says his province will not collect the carbon tax on home heating beginning January the 1st, unless Trudeau gives all Canadians a break. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, is this even legal, and could other premiers maybe follow suit?
It would be hard for other premiers to follow suit on Scott Moe because I'll let you in on a little secret. Despite having the Sask party in charge for a long time, Saskatchewan still has a lot of holdovers from their very socialist days. And so Sask Energy is a provincial crown corporation. You know, they've still got their provincial crown corporation that operates a telephone service, an internet service, and home heating. So about 85% of people who heat their home with natural gas in Saskatchewan are through Sask Energy. So the government-owned agency can do that if the government tells them to. But as Premier Danielle Smith said, after most brought this out, you know, it's private companies across Alberta. You know, you've got Direct Energy in Lethbridge, let's say. Here in Toronto, I've got Enbridge is the main supplier. You couldn't have the provincial government telling a private company to disobey a federal law. So that's kind of the position that we're in. So Moe can do this, and you know it's a bold move, but you've still got David Eby, the new Democrat Premier of British Columbia, saying, hey, wait a minute, this is unfair. Danielle Smith in Alberta, hey, this is unfair. Just this morning, Doug Ford in Ontario said, this is unfair. Like, scrap this. You've got to treat everyone fairly. So Trudeau's getting an earful, and I just don't think this is going the way that he hoped, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a court challenge along the way.
Now, Brian, a Trudeau cabinet minister, Guy Hutchings, says if other parts of the country want to break on the carbon tax, they should elect more Liberals. Brian, that almost sounds like blackmail to me.
Yeah, it's called saying the quiet part out loud. This is them saying, hey, nice province you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. Maybe you should be voting Liberal. Maybe you should get on the protection racket. Isn't that what it sounds like? Yeah. So, Goody Hutchings is one of the Liberal MPs in Atlantic Canada that was facing the decimation of the party and the removal of her from her job if this change didn't happen. I'm not sure that this change is going to help Justin Trudeau in the polls, though. He continues to get hammered, and maybe he'll get back some support in Atlantic Canada, but the rest of the country is just scratching their heads. We've been told for 8 years now that the carbon tax is desperately needed. It's going to save the planet, and now it's not going to be applied to save Justin Trudeau seats. As I've been saying, he had to make this change because his support was melting faster than polar ice caps.
Now, Brian, do you see this carbon tax issue on home heating as maybe another opportunity for Tory leader Pierre Poilievre?
This was a massive gift to Poilievre, in my view. He was flying down to Windsor, Nova Scotia, which is in the riding of King Hants. The Liberals have held it for about 20 years. It was Conservative blue before then. And he was holding a rally in the riding of Liberal MP Cody Blois, who introduced Trudeau at his carbon tax announcement. They, I think they had 1,000 people out. The next day, he was in St. John's, Newfoundland, talking about this as well. Trudeau's response when Poilievre said, axe the tax, is to talk about how irresponsible that is. And don't you know the planet's on fire? And now he's axing the tax for people who vote for him. So, it shows that it's an unfair tax. It shows that Trudeau is willing to bend if it means votes. So he's not as pure as he wants you to believe. I think this is really going to help Pierre Poilievre over the coming months.
Brian, inflation and the high cost of living is something that we've all been battling for quite some time. But a surprise admission from Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem to an Alberta Conservative MP raised some eyebrows. Tell me more about that.
It was a Conservative finance critic, Jas Halan, who was questioning Macklem on, is government spending contributing to inflation. And what he got Macklem to say is that it would be good if monetary and fiscal policy were both rowing in the same direction. Now, fiscal policy is, of course, government spending. Monetary policy is the Bank of Canada and interest rates. And what have I been saying for about 2 years? What have economists been saying? That a contributing factor to inflation is the level of federal government spending. That having the Bank of Canada, John Manley put it well, the former Liberal finance minister, put it very well. He described it as the Bank of Canada is trying to jump on the brakes, but the federal finance minister and the Trudeau government is jumping on the gas, and they're trying to hit both of them really hard at the same time, and it doesn't work. Well, that's essentially what Tiff Macklem said in response to Jas Hallan's questioning. He said they're not rowing in the same direction. Inflation has many factors going into it, and anyone saying it's all Justin Trudeau's fault is lying to you as much as anyone that says, well, it's all the fault of the war in Ukraine. That's what the Prime Minister's been trying to do. It's all global factors. We don't have a hand in this. Major bank economists have said it. Now his own Bank of Canada governor has said it, just like he did a little while ago. He had to admit the carbon tax is an increasing part of inflation in this country. That's federal government policy right there.
It's funny, putting the foot on the brake and the gas at the same time, pumping them both, causes burnouts. And I tell you, a lot of Canadians are feeling the burnout right now, feeling burnt out. Brian, a surprise ruling for some on Monday that the federal court rejected a challenge to the 2020 gun ban decree by the Trudeau cabinet. What exactly was being challenged and what comes next?
If you recall, on May 1st, 2020, this is less than 2 weeks after the Nova Scotia mass shooting, the Trudeau government announced that they were taking the what they call military-style assault weapons off the streets, that these guns were designed just to kill the fastest number of people in the smallest amount of time. They described them as weapons of war. They had really overheated rhetoric on this, and they used the Nova Scotia mass shooting as the reason for it, even though by the time they made this announcement, they knew that the shooter had illegally imported his guns from the United States, that he had been subject to a court-ordered prohibition on owning or possessing guns. They knew that people had complained to the RCMP about him many times and nothing had been done. They knew all that. But they are determined to take as many guns away from licensed law-abiding Canadians as they can. So that's when they announced there's 1,500 types of guns. They're going to make them illegal. But of course, as we discussed a little while ago, they have no plan on how to get them out from people's gun safes and basements and so on. So the Canadian Centre for Firearms Rights, they challenged this, what's called order in council. It's basically a cabinet decree. It never passed legislation. It was simply a cabinet decree. They challenged it and said the government didn't follow proper procedure. They did not offer procedural fairness to firearms owners. And the judge in this case said there was no need for procedural fairness to be offered to law-abiding gun owners. This is going to get challenged all the way to the Supreme Court. Whether the Supreme Court will hear it, we don't know. But the Coalition for Firearms Rights has said they are going to challenge this further. It was a bizarre decision. I thought that there was a good chance that the CCFR could win. Unfortunately, they did not, and this will continue. But just recently, Justin Trudeau showed that this is all about politics. He imposed the ban on May 1st and gave an exemption. So that you weren't a criminal for having it in your basement, because he doesn't know how to get it off of you. Just 2 weeks ago, they extended the criminal exemption so people can keep these guns in their basements, in their gun safes, until October 30th, 2025. That's about 2 weeks after the next election. They are looking to campaign on this whenever we go to the polls, whether it's next week or in October 2025 as scheduled.
And what are the latest polls showing right now? The Tories have quite a comfortable lead, right? If an election was held today, it would be a landslide majority Conservative government?
It would be massive. The latest seat projections I've seen say that it would be about 205 seats, perhaps as high as 224.
Wow.
Now, I've had some people say Pierre Poilievre will win the biggest majority government ever. If he wins 205 seats, even 224, he would win the third largest majority government ever, and he'd be right behind Diefenbaker and Mulroney. And while I'm sure he'd like to be number one, he'd also take the third biggest majority ever. When Conservatives do win, they tend to win big in that in that fashion. And so Diefenbaker in 58, Mulrooney in 84, they both got over 200 seats, but there were a lot fewer seats in the House of Commons back then.
Brian, Ontario's finance minister has called for an emergency national meeting to discuss Alberta's proposal to leave the Canada Pension Plan and go our own way with an Alberta pension plan. Is this Ontario interfering in Alberta policy?
Not really, because it's the Canada Pension Plan right now, and Alberta leaving would, of course, affect the whole country. So, well, every province except Quebec. So, of course, everyone's going to have different viewpoints. And look, I've made clear that if Quebec can have their own pension plan, then so can Alberta. Constitutionally, the pensions are the responsibility of the provinces. But it was back in the 1940s, I believe it was, that they decided to pool together and bring about it was a bit later, that they pooled together and made a national pension plan, Quebec deciding to keep its own. Bethel and Falvey would have a few concerns. One, what would the impact be on the overall pension plan, the national pension plan? Would it impact Ontario residents and the pension they receive? But also, that opening number from Premier Danielle Smith, that was a great negotiating tactic, but saying Alberta will take more than half of the Canada pension plan, that was never going to happen. And so, of course, he would want to argue about that, and he would want to have a say. Alberta, because of the age of its population and such, there is an argument to be made that they should, if they leave, get a number higher than their percentage of the population. But leaving with more than half, yeah, that's not going to pass any math teacher's grading system.
Brian, after initially offering strong support for Israel and its war with Hamas, there appears to be pressure inside of the Liberal Party to maybe go a different route. What route is that?
Well, there's been calls for from some MPs, I think it was 33 total, including 23 Liberals who signed a letter calling for a ceasefire. Now, a ceasefire would mean both sides lay down their weapons. I'll say this, both the Prime Minister and his Defense Minister, Bill Blair, have said a ceasefire won't work. Blair was adamant. He said he doesn't think that Hamas would respect a ceasefire. He doesn't think that they would abide by it, and that Hamas must be eliminated. Trudeau has said similar words, that Hamas must be eliminated. But there is incredible pressure. There are divisions within the Liberal caucus with people saying the humanitarian crisis in Gaza can't be ignored. His Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, the other day called for a humanitarian truce. People said, well, wait a minute, a truce, is that just another way of saying a ceasefire? And they had to walk that back and say, no, we don't mean a ceasefire, but we want to pause to get humanitarian aid in. Even the Israeli government is taking time to ensure that humanitarian aid does go into the civilian population. They have posted what they have done. They have publicized what they've done, not just as a way to say, oh, look at me, aren't we great, while we're waging war against Hamas, but because they want to show that they are living up to legal obligations. So all of that to say that the Trudeau government is feeling pressure to go more towards the side of the people in Gaza. The problem is too many of the people making those calls, and we see it, some of the comments made on the steps of the Vancouver Art Gallery, some of the comments on the streets of Calgary, the streets of Toronto, Montreal, they are not pro-Palestinian. They are not in support of the people of Gaza. They are in support of Hamas. And that is a place that the Trudeau government can't go. So they're under pressure. I will give them kudos for walking the line so far. And I hope that they don't do what too many have done and come out quickly and support Israel. But as Ben Shapiro said to me recently, 2.5 seconds later, people have turned and they're against Israel. So far, they're not there, but there is a lot of pressure.
There's been a lot of steps taken in the past to combat Islamophobia in our country, but how about the anti-Semitism, which seems to be running rampant right now, Brian? What is Ottawa doing?
Right now, not a lot. Now, I do want to point out that the Prime Minister did denounce the anti-Semitism on display in Dagestan, in Russia, where, I don't know if you saw those video images, but people showed up at an airport and at hotels saying, basically, we want the Jews, give us the Jews. It's horrific images, and he's right to denounce that. But I want to hear him have something stronger to say on what's happening in our streets. That said, on Monday, he did meet with the families of hostages in Israel. They were there on Parliament Hill to meet with government officials and members of the opposition and make their case. And so it's a tough walk for politicians right now. And since I'm a regular critic of the Prime Minister, I may as well give him credit when it's due.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.